there. Thank you for joining Why We Are Christians. I'm Stephanie Erickson, and today I am interviewing Michael Graham. Michael was a follower and active participant of Eastern philosophies before he came to know Jesus Christ. We're going to find out a little bit about his story today. So Michael, why don't you tell us, welcome, number one. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your early family life, and where you were born, just kind of give us the basics of your life.
Yes, surely. My beginning was a trifle different in that my father was a doctor, he was a psychoanalyst and psychiatrist, and my mother was a nurse. But I spent the ages from 7 to 18 at boarding school.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't a bad experience. It was a family tradition of sorts. My father went to boarding school, his father went to boarding school. It went right down the line. All 13 cousins went to boarding school. So I was just one in a line of many. So
tell me, just so I understand, I think sometimes the concept is a little lost on the American population. What did your parents visit you on the weekends, or how did that work?
If only. In those days, every 3 months we were only allowed home for 2 weekends. We weren't allowed to phone our parents, but at the end of each term, which ran about 3-4 months, we had 3 weeks at home, and then another 3 weeks at the end of the next 3, and then 8 weeks at Christmas, and that was it.
Wow, so from 7 to 18 you were in boarding school.
And it was in the British tradition, very much. Quite disciplined, the academics were emphasised, sports was totally emphasised, 6 days a week, like it or not, and that was my thing. I enjoyed that very much, but it was very interesting. I don't know today that people undergo those compulsory disciplines as we once did.
True. Was it did it have a religious bent, or was it more secular?
Yes, it was Geelong Grammar Church of England boarding school. I sort of got the 3 bears of Christianity at that boarding school, with 15 minutes of chapel every morning and 1.5 hours of starched collar church on Sundays. I don't think Christianity was well taught. We got to know King James English very well, and the stained glass windows and the pleasant lilt of the hymns, but I don't think after 10 years of boarding school I could have said what the gospel really was, except Jesus Christ was a kind, loving, masterfully well-behaved human being.
So what were you interested in?
Well, I was very keen on sport, and I must say I did well in Latin. I did well academically up until the age of 11, then I went into a slow decline. I don't know why, but I did. And but when I became a teenager at school, perhaps when I was 16 or 17, my brain woke up and I started to think about life in a more careful way, its meaning and purpose. And unlike a lot of my friends, by the time I got to the end of my secondary schooling, I didn't know what I wanted to do. They did. One wanted to be a doctor, another one to go on the farm, another one an accountant, this, that, and every other thing. But the existential dilemma I had was, I'm not really interested in anything. This is a real problem. What am I going to do about it?
Right. So what did you do about it, Michael?
Well, what happened was this. My father had a huge library. And he was interested in religions and mysticism. He was a closet mystic himself a bit, I suppose. But I remember pulling down several books off his shelf on Buddhism or Vedanta, High Hinduism, and yoga, if you like, the spiritual form of yoga. And I discovered, to my amazement, that, at least as the way I interpreted it, is that they made extravagant promises. Follow this path and you'll experience a life free of suffering, the experience of the ultimate truth, and personal transformation. Well, that got me in. Where do I sign? That was fantastic. Excited. All of a sudden I said, yes, this is what I want to do.
So the perfect life was drawing you to it. You
Absolutely.
thought, this is it.
The first time. This was it. I was away. So what I did was I jumped on a motorcycle, or I bought a motorcycle, jumped on a ship, sailed to Ceylon in those days, Sri Lanka today, rode around Sri Lanka on my motorcycle and up through India, looking for a guru who'd come on very strong recommendation as a man whose very presence or touch would transform a person's life. So,
Really?
yes, indeed.
Wow. So how did you hear about this guru?
Well, there was a teacher in Melbourne.
Ah.
He was a hatha yoga teacher, which means teaching physical yoga. And I can remember sharing with him that I was irresolute, not clear about my direction in life. And he said, don't worry. He said, there's the greatest yogi in India. You go and see him. He will solve all your problems. So I thought, charming. I thought, that's my answer. So that's what got me to India. It was his recommendation that took me to this particular man at this particular time. Interestingly enough, I was his first Western devotee, and after 13 years he became world famous, if you like, along with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the Beatles guru. And he had, there were 4 of us at the beginning, 3 of us, an Australian, an American, and an Englishman. Mm-hmm. Sounds like the beginning of a joke, doesn't it?
Right, it does.
That was his beginning for Westerners.
Okay.
And later he had maybe 150,000 devotees in 46 countries of the world after 13 years.
Wow. Would we know his name if you told us?
I don't think the younger people in this generation would know his name, but the people of my vintage, they'd all know about Swami Muktananda Paramahansa, Swami Muktananda. Baba Muktananda, if you like, at that point.
So you found the guru. I'm not going to try to say his name, but so you found him.
Yes, indeed.
And then what happened?
Well, I could share how my first impression of him.
Oh, yes,
it was
please.
extraordinary. I was out the front of this ashram. Now, an ashram is like a monastery, you know, a bit like an 11th century Benedictine monastery, at least in the sense that there was a rigorous daily program. And I found myself at the front there with about 15 to 16 Indians and us 3 Westerners. And the first sign of his coming was the sound of a klaxon horn, da 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 da, and a 1962 Mercedes pulled up outside the ashram, and out stepped this very handsome 60-year-old in flashing silk orange robes, the robes of a Hindu holy man or sannyasi or guru. And I can remember thinking, and he had sort of gold rims Versace sunglasses. I thought, gee, this doesn't quite fit the image of a holy man with a long white beard. But he was dynamic. He was quite extraordinary. And he just brushed past the group as everyone prostrated as they do in India, full length on the ground as he came by. Of course, the Indians hold their gurus higher than Catholics hold the Pope, you see. So he was held in the highest esteem. Anyway, he came through. And after about a week, I had a private interview with him, which was interesting.
Can you tell us about it?
Sure. He spoke no English.
Oh.
So through an English professor from Delhi, who was a translator, I told him that I'd come all the way to India to have my meditation fixed. See, I was a meditator in Melbourne, Australia, but an utterly failed one. I found it very difficult, and instead of becoming calm and quiet and peaceful, I'd get positively knotted up, so that was hopeless. So this chap was the one who was not only going to solve all my life's problems, but teach me how to meditate.
Okay.
And after explaining this in 5 or 6 sentences, all he said was, don't worry, everything will be fine, through the translator.
That was it?
That was the conversation.
Okay.
That was the end of it. And then about a week later, I found myself in his meditation room, sitting on a real tiger skin with a tiger skin head and tiger skin paws, surrounded by, that would have been deer skins.
Oh, really?
Amazing environment.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I was startled. And I looked up, and he was standing over me. I was there alone, and he ran his hand across my forehead and across both cheeks. Turned on his heels and left. It took all of about 2 or 3 seconds. I thought, whoa, I've been touched by the guru. This is auspicious. Nothing happened. I felt nothing.
What did you expect that you might feel?
Well, I knew he was renowned for being able to awaken the Kundalini, which is understood in the Eastern spiritual tradition as the intelligence of the life force itself that lies dormant within every human being. And if by certain practices or if by the grace of the guru it was awakened, then it would lead to a sort of spontaneous trajectory towards self-realization over a number of years.
Oh, okay.
The key being spontaneous, the key being of the intelligence of life itself rather than your own self-propelled spiritual practice. So hey, I thought, whoa, this is good, but nothing happened. And that was interesting because in the next week, every time he saw me in the ashram grounds, he would say in English his few words, good meditation, good, expecting me to say, yeah, woo. But I would say, no, Baba, as we used to call him, next few days, good meditation, no, Baba. And then I got a little frustrated. I thought, oh, hello, this is not working. What's wrong? But then, again, I wasn't to be surprised. A Canadian turned up. And he said, Mike, let's go and meditate together. The two of us alone went to that same meditation room. And as we sat down, he said the 23rd Psalm, which of course I remembered well from school.
Of course, right.
And as he said it, I was so moved by the beauty of that thing. It touched the very centre of my soul. And all of a sudden, this explosion happened within me. And the strength of 10 men filled me. It was extraordinary. Now, I often hesitate to say this because people go, ooh, it seems a little strange, a little on the mad side, but not at all. I was flung to the floor, and I started to crawl my way across the floor with the strength and the sound of almost a ferocious tiger. Wow. It was amazing. I was self-possessed at the time. I watched it happening. I wasn't sort of going with something. It took me and moved me in this fashion. And I was even clearly aware that this Canadian guy was freaked out of his mind. He thought, whoa. Later on, he told me he'd never seen anything like it before, and he thought that it was the nearest thing he'd ever seen to an LSD freak out or something. But as I said, I wasn't worried because it was given a wholesome spiritual context. Mm-hmm. Don't worry, this is an expulsion of all the stultifying influences that separate you from ultimate reality, Parabrahman or Shiva or whatever you want to say. So I just didn't resist anything. So anyway, from that day, I started to have these amazing spiritual experiences. Very physical ones too, spontaneous mudras, as they call these gestures, the hands just appearing in this particular fashion spontaneously. I was risen to my feet sometimes and would assume these beautiful dance postures. I'd see visions, lights, blue light. I'd have moments of suffused, it was sort of stillness and peace as if held in a peaceful condition for a short time. And so it went on. Well, I was fascinated because this was not just a doctrine or philosophy, but it had an engine that moved it, you see. Mm-hmm. So I thought, wow, and a big promise attached to that engine. So I had a very powerful awakening.
From then on, when the Baba would ask you, was good meditation?
He never had to ask me again.
Oh, yeah, he could tell.
It went all over the place. Did you hear what happened to this guy?
So okay. So you were the talk of the town.
Well, I was the talk of the town, interesting. Even 13 years later, I was still the talk of the town. Muktananda used to love the fact that I'd had such a powerful awakening, and he would boast sometimes. He said, not even 10 men could have held him down. And he would laugh, So... but of course, that went on daily, but it was a very rigorous daily routine. We'd get up at 4:30 in the morning, do an hour's meditation. If you hadn't received the awakening, you would sit in the hope that you would receive this grace, and you'd be given a mantra, which would be Soham, which means He I am, or God I am. And if the awakening had taken place, as it had in my case, then you just surrendered to its workings. So anyway, then we'd chant for 1.5 hours the Bhagavad Gita in those days, which is the Hindu holy book, the equivalent of their Bible, if you like. And then we'd go out into the magnificent gardens of the ashram and do what was called devotional service, just work in the garden, clean and dust and this sort of thing, which was an integral part of this pathway, which was called Siddha Yoga. That was it was supposed to be the path of the perfected master. Part of it was having implacable faith in him. It was also giving devotional service to him, meditating and chanting regularly. And these 4 or 5 things were put together to eventually bring you to God realization or self-realization. So then we'd do all this work in the gardens, and then before lunch we'd have another half hour's chanting. Then after lunch, a 1 hour voluntary chant. All this, by the way, prior to this was mandatory. And then there'd be 45 minutes of meditation before dinner, then another 90 minutes of chanting after dinner.
Wow.
7 days a week, and we'd collapse into bed at 9 o'clock at night, and then the whole thing would start again. So
Wow.
It was rigorous, you know.
Rigorous is right. And how long did this period of your life last?
Well, this all began with a 5.5-month stint in that ashram.
Okay.
And I was still very hopeful. I think these charismatic experiences I were having that seduced me, if you like, in the sense of my thinking, well, this has got to lead somewhere. But of course, I originally set out on this path to become more clear about my direction in life and perhaps overcome some of my limitations of temperament and character, whatever. But it wasn't doing anything. I was just having experiences and remaining the same old familiar self, which was a bit disappointing. I thought, this isn't working. I remember one Swami at the ashram said, he wasn't having experiences himself, I was. And he came up to me one day and said, Kerr, well, so tell me. He knew I was having all these experiences. As he was to say, well, so what, you're having experiences? What's the transformation? What? I couldn't say anything. So he must have been discerning a little. So anyway, that was the end of that ashram experience.
Okay.
Many more were to follow, of course.
Where did you go from there?
Okay. Well, Muktananda had decided that he was going to promote meditation throughout the world. So when I went back to Australia after that 5.5 months, I, with 3 other people, organised the first step of his world tour.
Really?
So he came to Melbourne, Australia, with an entourage, including the famous Baba Ramdas, who's Be Here Now, the famous guy.
Right.
And he stayed with me. His bed was there, my bed was here, and we were together for 3 weeks in Melbourne, and that was the beginning of Muktananda's world tour, of which he finally did 3.
3 world tours.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
And then I got into business for 3 years, and got sick of that after about 3 years. And over that period, I would go back to India, back to the ashram, for 3 or 4 weeks every year.
Did you feel the most connection when you were at the ashram?
Not really.
Okay.
I was in it all, but not really of it all.
What do you mean?
What I mean by that is that though I was, well, first of all, I thought all the Hindu side of it was a bit silly. It was an alien culture to me, and having to chant and not understand what we were singing and all that stuff. I didn't like it, but I just submitted myself to the discipline. But it was the experiences that captivated me and kept me going. And I always felt there was something off. It wasn't quite for me. There was 10%, 15% missing. I was still casting around, wondering, reflecting, thinking, something's off here, this is good, that's not so good, what about this, what about that? Of course, the guru made out that he was enlightened, as all Indian, or so many Indian gurus do. And then they have the song called the Guru Gita, which extols the virtues and marvels of the guru being omniscient, omnipotent, free of all flaws. Well, this is quite absurd, of course. I've spent many years in India, and lived with Osho in his apartment before he became famous, when his name was Acharya Rajneesh. Met Satya Sai Baba, all the big notas, and it was quite clear that they were not omniscient or omnipotent, nor were they people of necessary exemplary character at all. I mean, some really dodgy stuff there. But so it was all fine. I was a seeker. I was drawing the most from what I could, but I was always casting around for what would make the difference.
Okay, so
I had yet to find it.
So you sort of began this journey by finding those books and reading those books in your father's library, and they were promising the perfect life.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
you went on the road to find that perfect life, and you had some experiences and thought you were on the path, but there was still this 10 to 15% little niggling at you that said, and you're a spiritual person. You were a spiritual person.
Doing my best to be.
You were on a quest, but still you were conscious of something wasn't exactly what you thought it was going to be. Is that right?
Beautifully put.
Okay. Okay, so then you got into business, but you would keep going back to India 3-4 weeks a year, you said. But then you said you got tired of business after about 3 years.
I did.
Okay.
And not only that, during that period, and later, I did a lot of the leading edge personal development programs of the day.
Oh, tell us a
You know,
little
in
bit.
those days, EST was famous.
Right.
Forum, then now it's the Landmark Education. I did that, of course. I did the Hoffman quadrinity process, which was a very expensive, sort of radical psychological expunging of every sort of influence your parents had ever had on you to mess you up.
Really?
Yeah.
So you,
Then-
sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. And then I did Silver Mind Control. And, over 1 million people have done these programs. Not the Hoffman quadrinity process, but Silver Mind Control, which was famous in the 70s, still goes today, EST Forum, Landmark Education. And then I did the Avatar training. I did many of these trainings. And this was all looking for what would make the difference. I was looking for a supplement, if you like, to these Eastern spiritual practices. And I was still meditating every day, still quite disciplined. But I was looking for this, that, and every other thing that might supplement it, still looking for the possibility of breaking through the gates of heaven. And it was interesting, none of these programs were silly or I never felt cheated.
Right.
There's always some minor amelioration of the human condition for a few weeks.
And didn't you come up with your own program that you marketed?
I did eventually, yes. I probably didn't use the word marketed, but in fact that's what it was. I eventually, at the end of this trajectory of all this personal development programs, I developed a program called the Decision Principle Training. And actually the revelation of that came in a tea house many, many years earlier when I gave up drinking chai. I had to give it up because drinking so much of it, my heart was in my mouth. And I thought, I've got to stop this, it's killing me. So I made that decision and caught the action of the decision as though in slow motion. And from that day, I could simply make a decision, and it was amazing. I could dismiss it. Not a fluid ounce of tea, for example, passed my lips for 16 years after that. Black tea, that was.
Right.
And so I developed that program. When I was asked to develop a program for a big shot personal development guy who was a good presenter but had no program of his own, that's how that came up.
Okay.
And I taught it around the world in Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, France, Italy, United States and Canada.
Wow.
And that took us up to about 1993.
Okay.
One thing that I haven't mentioned, which was quite important, is that I had years in the 80s as a high-end corporate consultant.
Okay.
A friend of mine won a huge corporate consulting contract with Australia's second biggest company, Telecom Australia. And we put about 15,000 people of their 90,000 through a broad range of personal and organisational development strategies to set that company up for success.
Wow.
It was a corporate cultural change program.
Wow.
So by then, by the time I'd finished teaching that program, the Decision Principle Training, I'd had a real experiential penetration of the old age movement out of India, the pragmatic world of corporate consulting, and the personal development programs under what you might say was the human potential movement or something like that. So, I'd really had a broad and deep experience of what was possible for a human being. And at the end of all that, I thought, look, I'd been exposed to a lot. I thought that I put everything that I'd been exposed to, the very best of what I'd been exposed to, and put it together as an amalgam of practices that I, or even I with a few of the friends who might join me, could eventually break through the gates of heaven.
Break through the gates of heaven. You've used that expression another time today.
Well, perhaps become enlightened or free from unsatisfactoriness or transformed or experience the highest truth.
Okay.
All that stuff. So I thought it was possible, and that was far from my experience to this point, though I'd had remarkable experiences.
Right, it sounds like
I've
it.
had classic Nirvikalpa Samadhi. People probably don't know what that is. It was the Turiya state, but these were experiences that parts of the Eastern spiritual tradition denote as forms of enlightenment.
Okay.
But they were ephemeral, they were passing, they were unsustainable. And I thought, well, it was thrilling at the time, but afterwards, so where does that leave me?
Right.
Nowhere in advance of where I was before. There's got
Okay.
to be a way. Something's got to work eventually. And so I kept moving on, and I put this program together thinking that we could really do something. But so I'd done so many practices. I'd done thousands upon thousands of hours of meditation.
Right.
Thousands of hours of chanting, study, reading books copiously, trying to re-engineer my consciousness as best I could, all to little avail. So, but there's one thing I had not done, and I'd never gone into complete isolation.
Oh.
You know, I read about all the mystics. I read about the Christian mystics, the Sufi mystics, the Desert Fathers, whether they were Buddhists, Hindus, Sufis. So many of these people had walled themselves up. Some have gone into isolation for 20, 30 years and never spoken to a soul. Well, I thought that 10 days would be a good start.
That's a good place to start, right?
So I did go into complete isolation for 10 days.
Wow. Where? Where were you?
Melbourne, Australia.
Okay, all right. 10 days of isolation.
And during the second one of those events, an extraordinary thing happened. It's important to say at the time that I was in a completely plain state of mind, as I am talking to you now, getting ready to settle myself onto a couch. And all of a sudden, the image of Jesus Christ formed up inside my chest cavity.
And how did you know it was Jesus Christ?
Well, I'll tell you how.
Okay.
First of all, my impression, it was a sort of a smoky image of something like you might see a statue with Jesus standing with his hands forward by his side.
Okay.
And that reminded me of a classical sort of posture you might see in a Catholic church.
Right, right.
But simultaneously with that appearance came the conviction of who it was. So I didn't have to surmise so much that it was him. But then within 1 second of that, there was an experience beyond all words can tell. And if I was to step it down into the poverty of language, there was an openness and love coming from Christ to me of cosmic proportions. And an invitation and a welcome, as if to say, give me your life and breath and I'll take care of you. Well, I was amazed, I was delighted, I was happy, I was thought, my goodness, it was as real as you're sitting there. But I didn't know how to respond. It was equal to the most remarkable spiritual experience I'd ever had, but I wasn't a Christian.
But confounding.
Well, perhaps that's too strong a word.
Okay.
It wasn't so much confounding, but what do I do about it?
How do I respond?
Yes, exactly. How do I respond to the person of Jesus Christ? Now, Jesus, I'd read about all the mystics, the Christian mystics, St. John of the Cross, very cool, St. Teresa of Avila, very cool, Miguel de Melita, Meister Eckhart, cool. But it's funny, Jesus was always a bit of a flat line for me. I mean, Jesus is cool, but, you know.
But, yeah,
heard
about him.
I don't know about Jesus. You know?
Okay, all right.
So here he was in person, inviting me. I thought, my goodness, this is amazing.
Michael, I'm going to have to interrupt you here. Okay. We are going to need to wrap this part of our segment up.
Very good.
A great place to stop because now hopefully the viewer is hanging and waiting for the rest of the story, which we are going to find in our next part of the interview. So
Wonderful.
This has been fantastic. Love hearing all about your experiences with the Eastern philosophy. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Stay
Stephanie.
tuned, viewers, for the next segment.